Camazotz, the Death Bat, the Mayan God of Night, Death, and Sacrifice, and an absolute legend in Nahui Mictlan. By looking into his class, design, skill set, backstory, and characterization, how well does the Camazotz of Fate Grand Order compare to his mythical counterpart? And what grade would I give his depiction? Let's do this. Okay, I know I just gave my usual spoiler warning, but seriously, if you haven't finished Lost Belt 7 and care about spoilers, you should stop watching this video right now. Don't worry, you can always come back to it later. Now with that said, let's continue. Camazotz is a beast, the first beast I have covered, which means it's time to explain what exactly a beast is. The beast class, or the evils of humanity, are apocalyptic threats capable of destroying the world, and so they must be overcome by humanity. Typically, the beasts represent some aspect of humanity, a certain emotion or sentiment that becomes a destructive force of gigantic proportions. Getia's sadness about how human life was limited ended up leading to his desire to help by remaking the entire world, to create a humanity that didn't have to face death, even if that meant incinerating the current world in order to start over. Every beast has something like this, some attachment to humanity that is so strong that it ends up becoming a force for destruction. Even if some, like Sessio and Chiara, have a warped perspective on who exactly is included among humanity. This is why, for instance, Ashiadomon couldn't become a beast in Heian Kyo. He didn't have any affection for humanity, no positive emotion that could be twisted to a negative purpose. For a beast, Camazotz is so far unique in FGO in that he is a beast not of proper history, but from the Lost Belt humanity of Mictlan, the Khan kingdom that he once ruled. He became a beast because, in desperation, the people of Khan all sacrificed themselves in order to empower their king, so that he might be able to defeat Ort. Effectively given immortality, Camazotz eventually succeeded by tearing out Ort's heart. But this is about as hollow a victory as you can get. He was fighting to save humanity, and yet he was now the last human alive. And since his desire to help humanity helped destroy humanity in the Lost Belt, that is what made him a beast. It was too much for him to bear. Camazotz was driven insane, and even if he continued to stick to his mission of wanting to protect humanity, he also desperately wanted to forget the horrific cost it took to do so. Thus, the thing that drives his actions as a beast is oblivion, his desire to forget everything that he has lost. Now, this motivation for Camazotz is clearly one created for the story of Lost Belt 7, and is not one that he has in Mayan mythology. After all, if all humans were dead because they had to sacrifice themselves to empower Camazotz to fight and defeat a space monster, I suspect I'd have some trouble making these videos, let alone getting anyone to actually watch them. For better or worse, humanity is still here. So what class might the mythical Camazotz qualify for? Well, to be honest, this is a hard one, for a few reasons. The first is that the information we have about Camazotz is rather limited. You can thank this jackass Diego de Landa for that. But the second reason is that Camazotz in myth is a terror, something like a representation of the unknown, the darkness, the nighttime hours, and the monsters that lurk within it. As for his role in Mayan mythology, his most famous story, and the only story that features him, the Popol Vuh, has Camazotz trick the hero twin Hunahpu into thinking that he was gone, only for Camazotz to rip Hunahpu's head off once he emerged from his hiding spot. So, Camazotz can hide his presence and he removes the head of one of the central characters in the Mayan creation myth. It sounds like Camazotz might qualify as an assassin. I mean, you might be able to make a case for Berserker too, but I'm thinking assassin is the best class for Camazotz, as well as being a beast, obviously. Getting into his character design, Camazotz blends together the appearance of a human, a bat, all together with a Mesoamerican flair. The human body and the giant bat wings are pretty obvious. But you see it in his crown as well, which, combined with his necklace, kinda looks like the head of a bat. This is an excellent design choice, since depictions of Camazotz tend to have him as either a large bat monster, or a hybrid being with a bat's head and a human's body. His beast form only brings him closer to these more traditional portrayals, a gigantic bat monster with a partly humanoid body. Camazotz is also carrying a gigantic scythe, making him seem like a reaper who inflicts death upon those unfortunate enough to cross his path. The name Camazotz literally means death bat in the Quiche language, and his chief domains are night, death, and sacrifice, all three of which are well represented either in Camazotz's design or his characterization. As far as connections to the original legends go, I think that Camazotz has not only a great design, but one of the best ones we've seen in all of Fate. He's meant to be a bat-human hybrid who terrifies everyone who knows of him, and that's exactly what we've got here. Moving into a skill set, well, Camazotz doesn't really have a skill set since he's not actually summonable in FGO. However, unlike Agravain, you actually do fight Camazotz in Lost Belt 7. It was actually the fight that gave me the most trouble. After 4 tries, I just threw up my hands and used a leyline stone rather than trying to figure out another party to try it with. Anyway, since you actually do fight Camazotz, you get to see him use some abilities, though we only really get the ability names and their effects. There's no profile to read talking about the lore behind these skills. With that said, if you look at the names of the skills Camazotz uses during his boss fight, many of them reference either the Lords of Xibalba, Hun came, 1 death, and Vukub came, 7 death, or they are named after one of the 6 houses. As for what these 6 houses are, they are realms within Xibalba that must be overcome by those looking to have an audience with the Mayan death gods. First, there's the House of Darkness, second, the House of Cold, third, the House of Jaguars, fourth, the House of Bats, fifth, the House of Razors, and sixth, the House of Fire. I'd explain what each of these houses are about, but the names kinda give it away. There's no curveball here about how the House of Cold is in fact not cold. It is only after going through all 6 of these houses, as well as the parts of Xibalba before the 6 houses, that you finally reach the lair of the Mayan death gods, the Lords of Xibalba. Anyway, a few of the skills that Camazotz uses directly references these various houses, even if he himself is only actually involved with one of them, Zotzilaha, the House of Bats, the domain that he rules. We will get back to this later on in the backstory section. As for what skills Camazotz might have if he became a servant for real, I'm not sure. Whatever they might be, it ought to be things relating to either his mythology or his Lost Belt counterpart, depending upon which version of the servant they decide to create. So, fear effects, perhaps instant death, or just take stuff from his boss fights. I know, I'm not really giving this much thought, but I'd really like to get to the meatier parts of this video. Also, since Camazotz isn't actually a servant we can summon, there's no Bond CEs or Valentine CEs to talk about. If I had to give him some, I'd say Hunapu's skull for the Bond CE, and some bat-themed chocolate or something for the Valentine, or maybe just stuff connected to his story in Lost Belt 7. Again, this depends upon whether or not the hypothetical Camazotz servant would lean either more into his Mayan mythology version or his Lost Belt 7 version. Now for characterization, starting with a look into the legends surrounding Camazotz. While my previous video talked about Tezcatlipoca and Aztec mythology, the great civilization of central Mexico, for Camazotz, we move south to the Mayans, to southern Mexico, Guatemala, Belize, Honduras, and El Salvador. However, while the Aztec Empire was centered around its capital of Tenochtitlan, the Mayans not only had a much longer history, they had many different peoples and centers of power: El Mirador, Tikal, Chichen Itza, etc. While the largest of the Mayan peoples are the Yucatec located in the Yucatan Peninsula, today we are interested in the Quiche of Guatemala, who were prominent during the post-classical period of Mayan civilization, roughly from 950 to 1539 CE. Now, while they called themselves the Quiche, which means the many trees in their language, referring to how they live in a jungle region, the Nahua people to the north, the Aztecs and the other Central American peoples, they called the Quiche people Cuauhtemalan, or the place of the many trees. If that name sounds oddly familiar, later on, when the Spanish came to conquer the Quiche in 1524, having already conquered the Aztecs, their forces included allied Nahua warriors like the Tlaxcala, and even some subjugated Aztecs. And since these native allies of the Spanish called the Quiche the Cuauhtemalan, the Spanish decided to call them that too, giving us the name Guatemala. Anyway, the Quiche themselves had been absorbed into the Mayan Empire during their classical period, but then broke away and formed their own state after things cracked apart. Nevertheless, their time as part of the classical Maya civilization left its mark upon the Quiche, and since they themselves ended up getting conquered by the Spanish, that meant that the Spanish missionaries who came to convert the Quiche to Christianity also ended up recording information about the Quiche and their culture. Rather unusually for the Americas, the Mayans developed a writing system, and while most of their works were destroyed by the Bishop Diego de Landa in 1562, a few managed to survive, and so remain with us today. The most notable of these works is called the Popol Vuh, the Book of the Community. which details the creation myth of the Quiche people and their later history. It's the creation myth parts of the Popol Vuh that we are interested in, since it is there that we have our two and only two stories about Camazotz. Probably the most famous part of the Popol Vuh concerns the story of the hero twins, Hunahpu and Xbalanque, and their conflict against the lords of Xibalba, the Mayan underworld. Though Hunahpu and Xbalanque are actually the second pair of hero twins. The first pair are their father and uncle, Hun Hunahpu and Vukub Hunahpu, who were similarly challenged by the lords of Xibalba, failed, and were then murderized. However, the daughter of one of these Mayan underworld death gods was examining the severed head of Hun Hunahpu when the severed head spit upon her hand, and then she became pregnant with this severed head's sons.
I have so many questions!
This daughter of one of the lords of Xibalba, by the way, her name is Squeak, which roughly translates to Blood Moon. Blood Moon, Crimson Moon, Type Moon. The planned successor to Type Moon is Arcoid Brunstud, aka Archetype Earth in proper history. And what is the name of the Archetype Earth in the 7th Lost Belt? Isquik. Ha, I see what you did there. Anyway, Isquik would have two sons, somehow, and these two sons would be our hero twins, Hunahpu and Xbalanque. To make a very long story short, like their two fathers, the twins Hunahpu and Xbalanque get the attention of the lords of Xibalba, and so have to journey down into the underworld to face their challenge. Unlike their father and uncle, however, these twins are craftier, coming up with numerous tricks and shenanigans to outwit both the lords of Xibalba and their various challenges. Well, not entirely, because there is one moment in their journey where the hero twins themselves get tricked. After crossing the rivers of Scorpions, Blood, and Pus, and then the crossroads area where they have to choose one of several tunnels to proceed, the twins then find themselves having to go through the 6 houses. The houses of Dark, Cold, Jaguars, Bats, Razors, and Fire. The same 6 houses I mentioned earlier in this video. For most of these houses, the twins come up with some neat trick to bypass the challenge. For the House of Dark, for example, the twins are supposed to spend the night in the house with a lit branch, and to return with that branch still intact by morning. To get past this, the twins take the feathers of a macaw, stick some fireflies on the end of it, making it look like the lit branch, and so trick their way past this challenge. For the 4th house, the House of Bats, the twins must spend a full night inside of the house, a house filled with deadly bats that will feast upon them if given the chance. The twins hide themselves inside of their blowguns, using them as shelter from the swarms of bats. But when the House of Bats later falls silent, Hunahpu, thinking that the bats had gone to sleep due to the onset of morning, sticks his head out from the blowgun to have a look around. As he does so, a bat immediately swoops in, rips off Hunahpu's head, and flies off, taking the head to the lords of Xibalba. It is this bat, either the lord of the House of Bats itself, or just one of its many denizens, this is the creature we know as Camazotz. Camazotz would take Hunahpu's head to the lords of Xibalba, who would later challenge the twins to the Mesoamerican ball game, and naturally the ball that they would use in the match would be Hunahpu's severed head. In the meantime, Xbalanque had replaced his brother's head with a squash, and, during the match itself, would switch Hunahpu's head with the squash, not only allowing his brother to get his head back, but when the lords of Xibalba then hit the squash as part of the game, they smashed it, costing them the match. As you may have gathered by now, what with the spitting into Isqueak's hand making her pregnant, the twins hiding inside of their own blowguns, that Hunahpu didn't die from having his head ripped off, or that the twins were able to first replace Hunahpu's head with a squash and then to put Hunahpu's head back on for real, we aren't exactly dealing with a realistic story here. Yes, I know it's mythology, but this is pretty out there even by mythology standards. The other story that references Camazotz is in negotiations between humanity and the god of fire, Tohil. A deal is struck between Tohil and humanity that, in exchange for learning the secret of fire, humans must offer sacrifices to the gods, beginning that whole business which Mesoamerican civilization has become so famous for. But Tohil did not meet the humans directly. Tohil sent an envoy to negotiate for him, and that envoy was Camazotz. Tohil, by the way, is often connected with another Quiche Mayan deity, Cucumatz, a god of wind and rain that helped create the world together with another god, Tepeo. Also, both Tohil and Cucumatz are both described as feathered serpents. and Cucumatz's domains make him the Quiche Maya's equivalent to gods found in other Mesoamerican cultures, notably Quetzalcoatl from the Aztecs and Kukulkan from the Yucatec Maya. These two stories, the one where Hunahpu gets his head ripped off in the House of Bats, and then serving as an envoy for the god Tohil to negotiate granting humans the gift of fire, these are the only two stories I can find that involve Camazotz. Everything else about him that I've been able to find has been more abstract, talking about his appearance, how he represents the unknown darkness of night, and all the potential dangers that may lurk within it. There might have been more stories about Camazotz in the past, but we don't have them anymore. All we have left are fragments. Still, even with how little this is, we do know at least one thing for sure, that Camazotz, as a Mayan god overseeing the domains of night, death, and sacrifice, was no joke. He was a predator of the night that made his lair in the depths of the Mayan underworld, and that, even for the hero twins of Quiche legend, who were crafty enough to ultimately defeat the Lords of Xibalba, one of them still ended up losing his head thanks to this terror of the night, the great bat monster that we call Camazotz. And that brings us to Fate Grand Order and the events of Lost Belt 7, Nahui Mictlan. We first meet Camazotz in the first underworld, where he wounds King Protea and makes her into an altar using a command seal, the seals that the protagonist had traded to Tezcatlipoca in order to come back to life. Our first impression of Camazotz is that he is a crazy guy who Mictlan just kinda has to live with, because he's one of the strongest beings in the Lost Belt, giving even Tezcatlipoca and Uoga Marie pause for thought. He doesn't seem to be on anyone's side but his own. Everyone has to be wary of him, especially those looking to traverse the underworld layers, or especially his home in the 8th layer. Fittingly, his home in the 8th layer is also the 4th underworld layer, much like how the House of Bats was the 4th of the 6 houses of Xibalba. But unlike his mythical counterpart, while he might make his home in the dark caves of Yayaukwi, Camazotz doesn't stick to his lair. He pops in wherever he feels like. But of course, Camazotz isn't just a boogeyman for the residents of Mictlan. There is a deeper and extremely tragic backstory behind this crazy Batman. We get our first hint of this at the end of Part 1, after he learns about Tezcatlipoca and David's plan to awaken Ort and destroy the world. And while this reaction does involve Camazotz saying he's going to kill the protagonist, the reason why is so that he can be the last master of humanity, its final protector. Later on, we get his full backstory, that he is the last survivor of the Kingdom of Khan, a human kingdom in Mictlan that existed about 6 million years in the past. But after about 100,000 years of growth and prosperity, Ort woke up and began to lay waste to the kingdom. In desperation, the humans of Khan collectively sacrificed themselves in order to empower their king, Camazotz, so that he might be able to defeat this terrible monster. This gave Camazotz great power, made him unable to die, and so he was, eventually, able to defeat Ort through sheer determination and attrition. He ripped out the heart of Ort, and then used it to help refuel the sun in Mictlan. In other words, Camazotz saved the world, but the cost was too high. Everything he had fought for, the kingdom and the people he had sought to protect, it was all gone. He had sought to save humanity, but his victory had come at the cost of all of the Lost Belt's humanity, and so turning him into a beast. In other words, Camazotz had to destroy humanity in order to save it. No wonder he went insane. Upon realizing this, Camazotz sought desperately to forget, to not think about the fact that he had lost everything he held dear, because if he thought about it, it would destroy him, and so his beast Logos became Oblivion, to forget everything. From this point on, Camazotz roamed the Lost Belt, acting as a boogeyman for the Danos, opposing those who tried to venture too deep into Mictlan, all the while having only really one purpose: to survive. After all, if he continued to survive, then that meant that humanity, the thing he had lost everything to protect, his survival meant that humanity in Mictlan was still alive, that everything that he had lost still meant something. But unfortunately, no matter what, Camazotz was pretty much doomed to fail. If Ort awoke again and destroyed the world, Camazotz and the Lost Belt would disappear. And if Ort was destroyed and with it the fantasy tree, then Camazotz and the Lost Belt would disappear. The only real way for Camazotz to win would be to kill the protagonist, become the final master of humanity, and then somehow put Ort to sleep once again. But that would really only prolong the inevitable. But in his encounters with Chaldea, Camazotz would come face to face with someone he couldn't imagine. Someone who, unlike himself, looked back into their own past, called upon the servants of those who had once served them, and managed to remember their names and deeds. All the things that Camazotz was desperately trying to forget to keep himself from despair. So when Camazotz met this person, the Egyptian pharaoh Nitocris, he felt a mix of horror, revulsion, and yet respect. Because this was someone who could do the one thing that he couldn't do. She honored those who had served her, and still kept her head held high. Camazotz became deeply fixated upon Nitocris, you might even call it attraction, and so sought to keep her with him, perhaps to learn from her, to have as his queen, or something else along those lines. Unfortunately for him, Camazotz ended up making a deal with Nitocris that badly backfired, promising to make her queen of his domain, the Fourth Underworld, if Nitocris's allies in Chaldea came to rescue her from him. Sure enough, Chaldea arrived, Nitocris took control of Yaoqui, and then transformed herself into an altar, using her authority to force Camazotz to remember everything. Having the memories of everything he had lost and suffered come back to him all at once, Camazotz lost his immortality, and so soon was defeated by Chaldea and Nitocris' altar. But, in a final selfless act, as Nitocris returned to normal and began to fall into the abyss below, Camazotz swooped in, caught her midair, and rescued her. His own fate afterwards is unclear. Did he then jump into the abyss himself, taking his own life out of despair? Did he fly off to parts unknown? We don't know. We never see Camazotz again in Lost Belt 7, and we have not seen him since. Despite this, his long battle to put Ort in stasis was not in vain, since because he pulled out Ort's heart and used it to empower Mictlan's son, that part of Ort would later become the Lost Belt king, Kukulkan, and it would be Kukulkan who dealt the finishing blow to Ort, destroying both herself and Ort together to ensure that it wouldn't come back. So while Camazotz might have lost everything that he held dear, without him, victory against Ort, and so the salvation of proper history, otherwise would have been impossible. Little wonder that, after hearing this guy's story, Camazotz has been highly sought after ever since, someone FGO players would love to see more of in the future. Alas, even on JP, who have a 2-year lead on us NA players, as far as I know, Camazotz hasn't reappeared since Lost Belt 7. This is a real shame because Camazotz is one of the most impressive characters we've met so far, fighting the monster Ort for millions of years until, eventually, he managed to knock it out. Despite the fact that it cost him everything he held dear, everything he sought to protect, Camazotz not only achieved victory, but he enabled our own victory later on. I too hope to see him again someday in Fate Grand Order. He's probably the one character currently locked away in NPC jail that I wish to see most. But until we do, we can only dream that, someday, this absolute legend will join us in Chaldea. And now for the verdict. What grade would I give Camazotz's depiction in Fate Grand Order? Well, his character design is fantastic. I don't think I could ask for something better. His skill set, what little we get of it, it does make references to things that connect to Camazotz in a few ways, but mostly it's just stuff he's linked to by association, the names of the Lords of Xibalba and the other 6 houses, even though Camazotz is only actually involved with the House of Bats. As for characterization, this is a case similar to what we saw with Barkest and Bavanshi, where the Fate writers take a character from mythology, and then, using that as a base, create a whole new character for FGO. And, like those 2 examples, Camazotz, despite effectively being a whole new character, maintains strong thematic links to his original lore, how he is a dark terror in the underworld, who is extremely dangerous to everyone who encounters him. The original god's domains of night, death, and sacrifice are all represented. Night due to how Camazotz is a bat god ruling from his dark lair, death because he is a deadly reaper everyone has to be wary of, and sacrifice because that's at the core of his Fate backstory. We may not have Camazotz as an official servant in FGO, not yet at least, but there is enough to say that, much like our 2 friends from Avalon Le Fay, Camazotz is a successful blend of 2 beings, the Mayan bat god, and a new character that proved to be the great unsung hero of the 7th Lost Belt. And so for a final grade, I'm going to give Camazotz, the Mayan god of night, death, and sacrifice, a B. If you would like to learn more about someone else who fought against all odds to defend his people, check out my video on Constantinos XI right here. Also, please like, subscribe, and come check out the stream sometime, currently taking place in the world of Red Dead Redemption 2. Until next time.